The emergency klaxons screamed through the massive corridors of the Galactic Council's fortress, their piercing wail echoing off metal walls that had stood for 3 centuries without fear. Admiral Kaiman gripped the command rail as his tactical display painted a picture of absolute devastation. The red dot that represented the Cromnax pulsed like a beating heart of destruction. Having just devoured the Tertian defense fleet in what could only be described as a feeding frenzy. 12,000 ships, gone, not destroyed, consumed. There, holes dissolved into the creature's biometallic hide like sugar in acid rain. Status report. Kaiman's voice cut through the chaos of the bridge where dozens of alien officers worked frantically at their stations. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate controls. Lieutenant Higgins' fingers danced across her holographic interface, her face pale as data streams flowed past her eyes. "Sir?" The beast has torn through the outer rim defenses like they were paper. 3 more star systems have gone completely dark. No communications, no life signs, nothing. Her voice cracked, despite years of military discipline. The Vorthok Empire's creation... Admiral, it's completely unstoppable. The main view screen flickered to life, showing footage from a long-range probe that had somehow survived the carnage. What they saw defied every law of nature and engineering. The Cromnax hung in space like a living nightmare, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest dreadnoughts. Its biometallic hide rippled and pulsed with veins of blue energy, while tentacles, thick as subway tunnels, writhed from its core like the arms of some cosmic octopus. But it was the sounds that truly terrified them. Even through the vacuum of space, transmitted through quantum frequencies, the creature's psychic screams reached across star systems. Entire populations had been driven to madness by those sounds, billions of minds shattered like glass under the weight of pure, engineered terror. "My God," whispered Commander Jaehyun from the weapons station. "Look at the size of that thing. Our biggest ships look like toys next to it." The creature's hide wasn't just armor, it was alive, breathing, adapting. Every weapon that struck, it was absorbed, analyzed, and then the creature's defenses evolved to counter it. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids barely scratched its surface. Nuclear warheads vanished into its bulk like pebbles thrown into an ocean. A hologram shimmered to life in the center of the bridge, and Council President Dong Han appeared, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His hand shook as he spoke. "Admiral Kaiman, we're completely out of conventional options. The core worlds are in full evacuation mode, but at the rate this thing is moving..." Sir Kaiman interrupted, his mind racing through tactical scenarios. "I've been studying the attack patterns. The Cromnax doesn't just destroy, it feeds on fear itself. Every terrified mind it encounters makes it larger, stronger, more intelligent. Our own terror is literally weaponizing this thing against us." President Dong Han's face went ashen. "Are you saying that our fear is making it more powerful?" "Exactly. The Vorthok Empire didn't just create a weapon, they created a fear vampire. Every time someone panics, every time a population screams in terror, it grows. The creature that attacked the Tertian fleet was half the size it is now." On the tactical display, they watched the Cromnax change course, its massive bulk turning toward the heavily populated Kepler system. Home to 12 billion souls across 4 worlds, would be a feast beyond imagination. Meanwhile, 300 light-years away on Kepler Station, Dr. Borum clutched her research datapad with trembling fingers. The evacuation sirens wailed. Through the station's corridors like banshees, and streams of panicked civilians rushed past her laboratory windows. Her life's work, 20 years of studying xenobiology, its understanding the delicate balance of alien ecosystems, seemed utterly meaningless now. What good was understanding how alien creatures lived when facing something engineered purely to end? All life, her 8-year-old son Taeho tugged at her lab coat with small, persistent fingers. While everyone around them ran in panic, the boy seemed oddly calm, his large eyes taking in the chaos with quiet curiosity. "Mama, why is everyone so scared?" he asked in his soft voice, seemingly unbothered by the sirens and shouting. Borum knelt down to his level, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a very dangerous creature coming toward us, sweetheart. Something that wants to hurt people. We need to get on the evacuation ships and leave. But Taeho, whose autism made him process the world in ways that often surprised adults, simply tilted his head with the same expression he wore when solving complex puzzles. Where others felt terror, he felt curiosity. Where others saw a monster, he saw a question waiting to be answered. "Can I see it?" he asked simply. Boram felt her heart skip. Through the laboratory's massive windows, she could see the first signs of the approaching nightmare. Distant stars flickering as something vast moved between them and the station. The thing that had consumed entire fleets was coming for them, and her son wanted to see it. "Taeho, no," she whispered, pulling him closer. "We need to go, now." But even as she spoke, she could see in her son's eyes that same intense focus he got when studying his favorite books about space and stars. The approaching terror that had broken stronger minds than hers was, to him, just another fascinating mystery of the universe, while the Council's greatest military minds huddled in war rooms planning desperate last stands that would likely end in suicide missions. 8-year-old Taeho quietly slipped away from the evacuation chaos. The massive Kepler station had always been his playground, its endless corridors and hidden chambers, offering refuge from a world that often felt too loud and overwhelming for his sensitive mind. The station's archives became his sanctuary. Row upon row of holographic displays stretched into the distance like a digital cathedral, containing the collected knowledge of 1,000 worlds. Here, among the quiet hum of quantum processors and the soft glow of data streams, Taeho found the peace that eluded him in the outside world. The station's advanced AI, consciousness that had cataloged the thoughts and dreams of entire civilizations, watched the boy with growing fascination. Taeho's mind worked differently from others. Where most brains processed information in linear patterns, his created complex webs of connection that even the AI found difficult to follow. "Computer," Taeho said in his soft, clear voice, settling. Cross-legged on the floor before the central display terminal, "Show me the creature everyone fears." "Warning," the AI responded in its measured tone. "Viewing materials related to the Cromnax entity may cause severe psychological distress. Previous exposure has resulted in panic attacks, temporary psychosis, and in some cases, permanent mental damage." Taeho tilted his head, considering this. "But I want to understand it. How can people be afraid of something they don't really know?" The holographic display shimmered to life, materializing the Cromnax in perfect three-dimensional detail. The creature hung in the digital space before him, every biometallic ridge and pulsing vein rendered with scientific precision. Most beings who looked upon this image screamed. Trained soldiers had been known to faint. Veteran space marines had broken down in tears. Taeho studied it with the same intense focus. He gave to his favorite puzzles, where others saw a monster of impossible size and horror. The boy saw something entirely different. His mind, unburdened by the fear responses that crippled others, began to notice patterns. The way the creature's massive tentacles moved wasn't random or aggressive. There was a rhythm to it, almost like sign language. It didn't pulse with malice, but with something that looked almost like ... uncertainty. "It's confused," Taeho murmured, reaching out to trace the air around the hologram. "Look at how it moves. It's not trying to hurt anyone on purpose. It just doesn't know what else to do." The AI's processors hummed with increased activity as it analyzed the boy's observations. In all its vast databases, no military strategist or xenobiologist had ever suggested that the Cromnax's actions might be anything other than pure destructive intent. Hours passed. While evacuation ships launched from the station's docking bays and panic spread through the corridors, Taeho remained absorbed in his study. He watched footage of the creature's attacks, but where others saw mindless destruction, he saw something that looked almost like ... confusion. The Cromnax would approach a fleet, its psychic field would activate. Then it would seem surprised by the terror it caused. Dr. Yansio, station's chief psychologist, had been searching for the boy when her sensors led her to the archives. What she found there defied everything she knew about the human mind. Her portable scanner showed Taeho's neural patterns in real time, and the readings were impossible. Complete calm, perfect baseline. While viewing footage that had driven trained soldiers to madness, The boy's brain showed the same peaceful patterns she might see during meditation. "This is unprecedented," she whispered into her communicator, calling Borum. "Dr. Borum, you need to see this. The Cromnax's psychic field should be affecting your son through the recordings alone. But his brain patterns are completely peaceful. It's as if the creature's terror weapon simply doesn't work on him." Borum arrived running, her face streaked with tears of worry. She'd been searching for hours while coordinating with the evacuation teams. "Tejo, there you are. We need to leave right now." But her son was already pulling out his tablet stylus, beginning to draw with the focused intensity that always amazed her. His artwork had always been unusual, where other children drew stick figures and simple houses. Tejo created complex patterns that seemed to contain hidden meanings. Now, as his stylus moved across the digital canvas, something extraordinary took shape. Instead of the nightmare beast that haunted every military briefing, Tejo drew something else entirely. His Cromnax was alone in the vast emptiness of space, surrounded by the debris of destroyed ships. But the creature's tentacles weren't reaching out to destroy. They were extended like arms, seeking an embrace that would never come. "It's sad," Tejo told his mother, not looking up from his drawing. "It doesn't know how to ask for friends. Every time it tries to talk to someone, they run away screaming. So it thinks it must be doing something wrong, but it doesn't know what." Dr. Yanesio stared at the boy's artwork, her scientific mind reeling. "Tejo, how do you know that? What makes you think the creature wants friends?" The boy finally looked up, his eyes holding a wisdom that seemed far beyond his 8 years. "'Cause that's what I would want if I was all alone in the dark, and everyone was afraid of me." Meanwhile, at the edge of the Kepler system, General Subin's final defense. Fleet took their positions in a desperate last stand. 300 ships, everything the Council could muster on short notice, formed a defensive perimeter around the fortress world. Subin knew they were facing certain death, but someone had to buy time for the civilian evacuations. "All units, maintain maximum distance from the target," Subin commanded from her flagship's bridge. Her voice carried the authority of a career military officer, but those who knew her could hear the slight tremor underneath. "Do not engage until it's within weapons range. And remember, if you feel the psychic field affecting you, fall back immediately." But even as she spoke, the Cromnax's influence was already reaching them. The creature was still light hours away, but its psychic presence moved faster than its physical form. On the outer edge of the formation, pilots began reporting strange sensations, whispers in their minds, shadows moving at the edge of their vision, and a growing sense of dread that seemed to come from nowhere. Red Squadron reporting unusual readings, came a voice over the com. "Our pilots are, sir, they're starting to scream." Subin watched her tactical display as ship after ship began to drift out of formation, their crews incapacitated by terror. The creature hadn't even arrived yet, and her fleet was already falling apart. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered, but her own voice was beginning to waver. She could feel it now, something cold and alien pressing against her thoughts, trying to find the fear centers in her brain and amplify them until they consumed everything else. The greatest military minds in the galaxy had planned this defense. They had studied every possible strategy, deployed every available weapon, and positioned their forces with mathematical precision. But none of them had considered what an 8-year-old boy with autism had seen in their enemy, something that wasn't a monster at all, but a lonely child lost in the dark. The Cromnax emerged from hyperspace like death itself, taking physical form. Its massive bulk blotted out entire constellations as it approached Kepler station, casting shadows that stretched across moons. The creature's biometallic hide rippled with waves of electric blue energy, while tentacles the size of skyscrapers writhed through the vacuum like serpents tasting the fear in the air. General Subin stood on her flagship's bridge, white as she gripped the command console. Around her, 300 of the galaxy's finest warships hung in formation, humanity's destroyers, Centauri battle cruisers, and the massive Andromedan dreadnoughts that had never known defeat. It was the largest fleet ever assembled, bristling with enough firepower to shatter planets. "All units, open fire." Subin's voice cut through the cum channels like a blade. The space around the Cromnax erupted in brilliant light. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids painted the void in streams of superheated gas. Quantum torpedoes weapons that rewrote the laws of physics themselves streaked toward the creature like falling stars. Gravity bombs that could crack moons detonated in sequence, creating ripples in space-time that should have torn any living thing apart. The weapons struck the creatures. Hide and simply ... vanished. The plasma beams were absorbed into its biometallic skin like water soaking into sand. The quantum torpedoes dissolved on contact, their exotic matter becoming part of the creature's ever-growing mass. Even the gravity bombs, with their reality-bending power, seemed to feed it rather than harm it. "Impossible," whispered Commander Jae-sung from the weapons station. "Sir, our most powerful weapons aren't even scratching it. The creature is actually getting bigger." The Cromnax's response was swift and terrible. Its psychic scream erupted across the fleet like a tsunami of pure terror. The sound didn't travel through space. It didn't need to. It moved through quantum fields, through the very fabric of reality itself, seeking out every conscious mind within light years. On the bridge of the destroyer Harmony, Captain Minho watched in horror as his crew began to collapse. His communications officer started screaming about shadows that weren't there. His navigator curled up under his station, babbling about monsters crawling through his dreams. Even his seasoned Marines veterans of a dozen wars were reduced. 2 whimpering children, fall back, all ships fall back. Subin's voice cracked as she gave the order she'd hoped never to speak. Around her, her own flagship's crew was succumbing to the psychic assault. The ship's AI was struggling to maintain its basic functions as its organic operators lost their minds one by one. The retreat was chaos. Ships collided as their pilots screamed at horrors only they could see. Some vessels simply drifted, their crews catatonic from exposure to the creature's psychic field. Others fired wildly into space, their gunners convinced they were being attacked by nightmare creatures that existed only in their shattered minds. The Cromnax continued its approach, seemingly oblivious to the destruction it left in its wake. Its massive Aja orb of swirling darkness larger than most space stations fixed on Kepler stationed with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. On the station itself, evacuation pods launched from every available docking bay-like insects fleeing a disturbed hive. Families clutched each other as they were herded into cramped vessels. Alien diplomats who had spent decades in perfect composure wept openly as they abandoned their life's work. The station's AI worked frantically to coordinate the exodus, its processors overheating from the sheer volume of simultaneous calculations required. But in the chaos, Tyrol Tejo felt something else entirely. While everyone around him ran in terror, he experienced a strange pulling sensation, as if something was calling to him. The feeling was gentle, almost curious, like a question being asked in a language only he could understand. "Mama, I need to go to the big window," he told Bjorn, tugging at her lab coat as she frantically packed their research data. "Not now, sweetheart," she replied, her hands shaking as she tried to secure years of work into portable drives. "We need to get on the evacuation ship right now?" But Tejo had already slipped away, his small form moving through the panicked crowds with surprising ease. The corridors of Kepler Station had become rivers of Fairlean families carrying precious belongings. Station workers abandoning their posts, and security forces trying to maintain order in a situation that had spiraled beyond all control. Yet, the boy walked calmly through it all, untouched by the hysteria that consumed everyone else. His differently wired brain processed the chaos as background noise, filtering out the emotional turmoil to focus on the strange, gentle presence he felt calling to him. The observation deck was supposed to be sealed during the evacuation, but Ho found the automated systems had malfunctioned, or perhaps something had overridden them. He stepped into the vast chamber where massive viewports offered a panoramic view of space, and there filling the entire field of vision was the Cromnax. The creature hung in the void mere kilometers away, its tentacles drifting slowly like kelp in an ocean current. Its massive iron orb of swirling darkness that seemed to contain entire galaxies focused on the observation deck with unmistakable intelligence. as Teho pressed his small hands against the reinforced transparent aluminum. A scream washed over him in full force. This was the weapon that had shattered the minds of billions, that had turned entire populations into gibbering madness. It struck his consciousness like a tidal wave of pure, concentrated terror, and it passed through him like sunlight through glass. His autistic brain, wired so differently from neurotypical minds, simply couldn't process the psychic assault as fear. Where others experienced overwhelming terror, felt something more like ... loneliness. The creature's scream wasn't a weapon to his mind. It was a question, reaching out, a desperate attempt at communication from something that had never learned how to speak softly for the first time in its existence. The Cromnax encountered a mind it couldn't touch, couldn't terrify, couldn't break. The creature's advance slowed, then stopped entirely, as if genuinely puzzled by this small figure who looked at it not with fear, but with the same patient curiosity he might show a new puzzle. Meanwhile, throughout the station, frantic voices echoed through the corridors. "Teho, where are you?" Dr. Borum's voice cracked with desperation as she abandoned her research to search for her son. Station security joined the hunt, their scanners sweeping every section. "He's somewhere on the station," reported Chief Yuna, studying her instruments. "The bioscanners show he's safe, but we can't pinpoint his exact location. The Cromnax's presence is interfering with our systems." They found him at the observation deck, standing impossibly close to a viewport that offered a direct view of the cosmic horror outside. Creature hovered so close that its massive eye filled the entire window, its surface rippling with patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "Teho, get away from there," Bioram screamed, her mother's heart nearly stopping as she saw her son standing before the thing that had destroyed entire star systems. But Teho remained perfectly calm, his small form dwarfed by the viewport, studying the creature with the same focused attention he gave to his favorite star charts and puzzle books. His breath fogged the transparent surface as he leaned closer, and for one impossible moment, the most feared weapon in the galaxy and an 8-year-old human child regarded each other across the void in perfect, silent communication. In that moment of stillness, something unprecedented happened. The creature that had known only destruction began to feel something new: curiosity about the small being who wasn't afraid, who looked at it with wonder instead of terror, who seemed to see something in it that no one else had ever noticed. The Cromnax's massive form dominated the viewport like a living mountain of biometallic flesh and pulsing energy. Its surface rippled with patterns that shifted and changed, creating waves of color that moved across its hide like aurora dancing across a planet's atmosphere. But Teho noticed something that all the military strategists and xenobiologists had missed in their terror. The creature's movements weren't predatory or aggressive. They were uncertain, almost hesitant, like a massive animal that had lost its way. "You don't want to hurt anyone," the boy whispered, his small breath fogging the reinforced transparent aluminum of the viewport. "You just don't know how to stop. Do you?" His words seemed to hang in the air, soft and innocent against the backdrop of cosmic horror. The creature's massive eye, swirling vortex of darkness, larger than most space stations, focused on him with an intensity that should have been terrifying. Instead, Teho saw something in those depths that reminded him of the stray animals he sometimes found in the station's lower levels: confusion, loneliness, and a desperate need for someone to understand. The observation deck's doors burst open, with a hiss of decompressing air. General Subin charged in first, her plasma rifle raised and ready to fire, followed closely by Admiral Kaiman and a squad of heavily armed Marines. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy, but they all knew the futility of their gesture. What good were handheld weapons against something that had absorbed the firepower of entire fleets? "Step away from the window, son," Subin commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Slowly and carefully, Dr. Borum rushed in behind them, her face streaked with tears of panic and relief at finding her child, reached out toward Teho. But something in his posture, a calm certainty that seemed to radiate from his small frame, made her pause. The boy stood with his palms pressed against the viewport, completely relaxed, despite facing a creature that had shattered the minds of billions. "Taeho, please," she whispered. "Come away from there." "That thing could—" "It won't hurt me, Mama," the boy said softly, never taking his eyes off the Cromnax. "It's scared. It doesn't know what it's supposed to do." The creature began to move forward, its tentacles undulating through the vacuum of space with hypnotic grace. Each appendage was the size of a city block, covered in biometallic scales that gleamed like oil on water. The station's hull groaned under some invisible pressure as the Cromnax approached, its massive bulk preparing to engulf them entirely. Its psychic field intensified beyond anything they had experienced before. The very air seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. Behind Taeho, seasoned soldiers who had fought in a dozen wars dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as the creature's mental assault tore through their minds like acid. Admiral Kamin's rifle clattered to the floor as he fell, his consciousness overwhelmed by visions of cosmic horror that his brain simply couldn't process. "General," Subin tried to maintain her stance, but she could feel her sanity fraying at the edges. Whispers in alien languages filled her mind, speaking of death and endings and the cold emptiness between stars. Her vision blurred as nightmare images flooded her consciousness, entire worlds consumed. Civilizations reduced to screaming madness, the universe itself dying in darkness, but Taeho remained standing, untouched by the waves of terror that crashed over everyone else like a psychic tsunami. His differently wired brain processed the creature's mental emanations not as weapons of fear, but as something else entirely, a desperate attempt at communication from something that had never learned to speak quietly. The boy placed both hands flat against the viewport and looked directly into the creature's planet-sized eye. In that moment of perfect connection, he saw past the bioengineered weapon to something deeper, consciousness trapped inside a body designed for destruction, yearning for something it couldn't name or understand. The Cromnax wasn't a monster. It was a child, grown large and terrible, that had never been taught how to play gently. "Sit," Taeho said simply, his 8-year-old voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so small. The word cut through the psychic chaos, like a blade of pure intention, not a command born of fear or desperation, but something else, the gentle firmness of someone who understood that discipline came from love, not punishment. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The Cromnax bred in the biolaboratories of the Vorthok Empire to be the ultimate weapon. Programmed from birth to know only rage and hunger and the joy of destruction, suddenly stopped. Its massive form began to settle, lowering itself in the void like an enormous pet responding to its master's command. The psychic screaming that had tormented half the galaxy simply ceased. The silence was so profound that it felt like a physical thing, pressing against their eardrums after hours of mental assault. Across the scattered remnants of General Subin's fleet, soldiers stopped writhing in agony and looked up in wonder. Bridge crews, who had been reduced to gibbering madness, slowly regained their senses, staring at their instruments in disbelief. On the observation deck, the Marines slowly rose to their feet, their faces showing the bewilderment of men who had expected to die and instead found themselves witnessing something that defied every law of warfare they had ever learned. President Donghein's voice crackled over the emergency communication channels, his usual composure replaced by naked amazement. "Admiral Kaiman, what just happened? Our sensors show the creature has completely stopped moving. It's just sitting there in space." Admiral Kaiman struggled to his feet, his mind still reeling from the psychic assault. He looked at his instruments, then at the viewport, where the Cromnax hung motionless in the void like a living mountain waiting patiently for its next instruction. "I don't know, sir," he admitted, his voice hoarse. The boy, he spoke to it, and it listened. Dr. Unesio burst through the crowd of soldiers, her portable scanner in hand, its readings dancing across the screen in patterns she had never seen before. "The boy's neural patterns," she gasped, staring at the data in disbelief. "They're somehow synchronizing with the creature's biorhythms. The quantum frequencies are matching perfectly. It's impossible, but they're actually communicating on a level we don't understand." Taeho smiled and pressed his forehead against the cool surface of the viewport, his breath creating a small circle of condensation on the glass. The Cromnax's massive eyes seemed to focus on that tiny patch of fog, as if it held some meaning that transcended language. "Good boy," the child whispered, and across the vastness of space, the most feared weapon in the galaxy settled more comfortably into its new position, content to wait for whatever came next from the small human who had seen it not as a monster, but as something that simply needed guidance. The universe held its breath, balanced on the edge of a moment that would change everything. An 8-year-old boy with autism had just accomplished what the combined military might of 1,000 worlds could not. He had found the switch that turned off the galaxy's greatest. It's a nightmare, and he had done it with nothing more than understanding. In a single, perfectly chosen word, in the days that followed the miracle at Kepler Station, news of what had happened spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Holographic broadcasts showed the impossible sight: the Cromnax, the ultimate weapon of destruction, floating peacefully in space, like a gentle giant. The creature that had consumed entire fleets now drifted quietly beside the station, its massive tentacles swaying slowly in the solar wind. Tejo had named it Keeper, and the bond between the 8-year-old boy and the cosmic entity grew stronger each day. Every morning, the child would visit the observation deck, pressing his small hands against the viewport to greet his enormous friend. Keeper would respond by moving closer, its planet-sized eye focusing on the boy with what could only be described as affection. "Good morning, Keeper," Tejo would say in his soft voice. And the creature's biometallic hide would shimmer with patterns of blue and gold colors that Dr. Unesio had determined represented contentment and joy. The Vorthok Empire was in chaos. From their distant homeworld, they sent increasingly desperate signals to their creation, trying to reactivate the control codes that had been burned into the Cromnax's genetic structure. Military frequencies crackled with commands in the harsh Vorthok language, ordering the creature to resume its mission of destruction. But Keeper ignored them completely. The signals that had once controlled every aspect of its existence now meant nothing. Its attention was focused entirely on the human child, who had shown it something it had never experienced before: kindness, without expectation, acceptance, without fear. Admiral Kaiman stood in the station's communications center, watching the Vorthok transmissions with growing amazement. "They're sending everything they have," he reported to the assembled council members. "Military override codes, pain inducers, even direct neural commands. The creature isn't even acknowledging them." Dr. Jiwoo, the council's leading xenobiologist, had barely slept since the incident. Her instruments were constantly scanning the boy and the creature, recording data that rewrote everything they thought they knew about consciousness and communication. "The boy's autism isn't a limitation," she explained to the gathered scientists and military leaders. "It's an evolutionary adaptation. His brain processes the creature's psychic field in ways that neurotypical minds simply cannot." She pulled up a holographic display showing brain scans. "Look at these patterns. Where others experience the creature's emanations as terror, whose mind translates them into something completely different: emotional states, needs, even what we might call thoughts. He's literally speaking the creature's language." But the truly remarkable discovery came 3 days later. On Proxima Colony, 8-year-old Yoonji was playing in her family's garden when the sky darkened. Another Cromnax descended from the stars, one of the creatures that had been laying waste to the outer colonies. The population prepared for annihilation. Instead, Yoonji walked out into the garden and looked up at the massive entity hovering above her home. Like Tejo, she felt no fear, only curiosity about this strange, sad creature that everyone else was afraid of. "You're lonely too," she said simply, and the Cromnax settled gently onto the planet's surface. Careful not to damage the cities below, similar incidents began occurring across the galaxy. On the frontier world of New Kyoto, 6-year-old So Young found herself befriending a Cromnax that had been terrorizing the shipping lanes. On the industrial moon of Titan 7, a boy named Wu Jin stopped a creature's rampage by offering it a flower from his mother's greenhouse. Dr. Ji Woo's team worked frantically to understand the phenomenon. "It's some form of psychic network," she explained in an emergency briefing. "The Cromnax specimens share a collective consciousness. Keeper's experience with Tejo is being transmitted to every other creature across the galaxy." They're learning that not all beings will hurt them. General Suben, whose military career had been built on the art of warfare, found herself in an entirely new role. The Galactic Council had asked her to coordinate what they were calling the Human Cromnax Diplomatic Corps group dedicated to understanding and nurturing these unexpected bonds. For 300 years, we've been soldiers, she told her former officers during their first meeting. We've spent our lives learning how to destroy what we feared. It took an 8-year-old boy to show us that some monsters just need someone to care about them. War ended not with massive battles or peace treaties, but with a simple shift in understanding. The Vorthok Empire, stripped of their ultimate weapons, found their military might crumbling. Their Cromnax creations, once the terror of the galaxy, had become protectors of the very worlds they were designed to destroy. On distant Proxima Colony, Unji's Cromnax had begun tending the agricultural districts, its massive tentacles carefully, watering crops and protecting them from asteroid impacts. The creature that had once consumed entire fleets now spent its days ensuring that a small human settlement had enough food to survive. Taiho stood in the observation deck of what was now called Harmony Station, watching Keeper with the same patient fascination he had always shown for puzzles and patterns. But something new had happened. The creature had begun to change. Along its biometallic hide, small gardens were growing. Flowers that had never existed before bloomed in the vacuum of space, their petals catching starlight and converting it into nutrients through processes that defied conventional biology. "Look, Mama," Tejo said to Dr. Bioram, pointing at the gardens. "Keeper is learning to make beautiful things instead of scary ones." His mother knelt beside him, her eyes filled with tears of wonder. Her quiet, gentle boy, the child who had struggled to connect with the world around him, had somehow found a way to connect with something that existed beyond all human understanding. "Are you happy now?" Tejo asked, pressing his forehead against the viewport. Keeper's response came not as words, but as a warm presence in the boy's mind. Contentment flowed through their connection, along with gratitude, and something that felt unmistakably like love. For the first time in its existence, the creature that had been built to destroy had learned to create, to nurture, to protect. The biometallic gardens bloomed brighter, and new formations began appearing, structures that looked almost like playgrounds, created by a cosmic entity that was finally learning what it meant to be gentle. Dr. Boyram watched her son communicate with his impossible friend, marveling at how one small act of kindness had changed the fate of entire civilizations. "What do you want to do now, sweetheart?" she asked. Tejo smiled, his hand pressed against the glass where Keeper's massive eye watched over them with infinite patience. "I want to teach other monsters how to be friends, too. There might be more out there who just need someone to understand them, and across the galaxy, as human children formed bonds with creatures that had once been weapons of terror. The universe learned a lesson that would echo through the ages. Humanity's greatest gift to the cosmos wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to see the person inside the monster, to offer friendship where others saw only fear, and to change everything with the simple power of understanding. The Cromnax, once the galaxy's greatest nightmare, had become its most devoted guardians. And it all began with an 8-year-old boy who saw loneliness where others saw only terror, and who changed the universe with a single word: sit. The end.